The Veiled Legacy, the story of Queen Nzinga Mbande. Introduction. A revelation from the heart of Africa. There are names in history that have been polished smooth by countless retellings. Then there are those rough gemstones that lie in the shadows, waiting for the right light to make them sparkle. Our story begins with one such gem. For centuries, whispers of a woman have traveled across Angola, through villages and down the Kwanza River. A woman whose courage and strategic brilliance challenged the might of empires and upended expectations of what leadership could look like. Most of us know Cleopatra. But long before the Ptolemaic queen sailed down the Nile, another African woman forged an empire in Central Africa. She commanded armies, negotiated with Europeans in their own tongue, played rival powers against each other, and refused to bow to colonial aggression. Her name was Nzinga Mbande, also spelled Nzinga or Ana de Sousa. In the 17th century, she ruled the kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba, territories in what is today Angola. Her life story reads like an epic, part diplomacy, part guerrilla warfare, part statecraft. And yet she is strangely absent from many mainstream histories. This documentary is a call to bring her out of the margins and into the center of our collective memory. Africa's Lost Leaders. Setting the scene. Before we meet Nzinga, let's acknowledge a glaring truth. Africa's past is rich with powerful leaders, yet too often we only hear about a handful of names. Kingdoms such as Mali, Songhai, and Benin thrived long before Europeans set foot on the continent. The Mbundu people of Central West Africa, who called their ruler Ngola, the title that later gave Angola its name, developed complex systems of governance, trade, and spiritual life. When the Portuguese arrived in the late 1500s to establish a trading post in Luanda, they found sophisticated societies that were anything but primitive. Within decades, however, this contact degenerated into conflict. Portugal's hunger for slaves and territory sparked wars that devastated local populations and reshaped politics. By the time our heroine was born around 1581-83, her homeland of Ndongo faced threats from Portuguese soldiers, the neighboring kingdom of Congo, and bands of Mbangala mercenaries. It was a world on fire, and into that fire stepped Nzinga Mbande, the Veiled Legacy, meeting Nzinga. She entered the world in unusual circumstances. According to oral tradition, her mother's umbilical cord twisted around the newborn's neck, and the Kimbundu verb kujinga, to twist, gave rise to her name. Difficult births were seen as spiritual portents. Those who survived were destined for greatness. Nzinga was born into the royal family, but she was not the primary heir. Two sisters, Kambu, Lady Barbara, and Fungi, Lady Grace, and a brother named Mbandi stood between her and the throne. Because she was not a direct competitor for kingship, her father, Ngola Kiluanji, showered his daughter with attention. He raised her in council meetings, legal tribunals, and battlefields. She learned to handle the traditional Ndongan battle axe, participated in war councils, and observed rituals missionaries taught her to read and write Portuguese. In a time when literacy was rare even among European nobility, a Mbundu princess became fluent in her enemy's language. That alone tells us much about her strategic mind. If you're wondering why you haven't heard of Nzinga, you're not alone. Colonial historians were reluctant to celebrate an African woman who so skillfully resisted European power. Even today, she is often reduced to a caricature, a warrior queen who kept a harem and wore trousers, instead of being studied as a stateswoman. Part of our mission here is to correct that. In this narrative, we'll look at her as a diplomat, a cunning commander, and a visionary leader. We'll also question the sources, recognizing that our knowledge comes from Portuguese chronicles, missionary accounts, and oral traditions, each with their own biases. A kingdom forged in fire, early life and ascent, growing up in a furnace. The late 16th and early 17th centuries were brutal for Ndongo. Portuguese forces fortified their positions along the Kwanza River, burned villages, and captured tens of thousands of people for the Atlantic slave trade. The Mbangala warbands terrorized the countryside, and rival nobles withheld tribute from the royal court. When Nzinga was about 10, her father became king. He tried diplomacy and war to stem Portuguese aggression, but struggled to keep his realm intact. These crises shaped the young princess. Instead of learning embroidery and courtly etiquette, she learned how to fight, negotiate, and survive. The diplomat princess. By 1621, Ndongo's new king, Nzinga's brother Mbandi, faced a dire situation. Lacking his sister's charisma or strategic gifts, he saw more and more territory fall to Portugal. He recalled Nzinga from exile and asked her to lead a diplomatic mission to Luanda. She accepted on 2 conditions. She wanted authority to negotiate on the king's behalf and permission to be baptized as part of the negotiations. She traveled to Luanda in splendor. While most African envoys wore European dress to impress the Portuguese, she chose to wear opulent Mbundu attire, feathers, jewelry, and cloth, making a statement that her culture was not inferior. The meeting that followed became legendary. As the story goes, the Portuguese governor offered chairs for himself and his officials, but placed only a mat on the floor for Nzinga. In Mbundu culture, mats were for subordinates. Unwilling to be humiliated, she looked to her attendant, who knelt and formed a human chair so that she could meet the governor eye to eye. Whether or not this story is embellished, it illustrates her refusal to accept a subordinate role. She used flattery and clear logic to win a treaty that recognized Ndongo's independence. The treaty allowed Portuguese slave traders in her brother's territory, but demanded the removal of Portuguese forts. As part of this diplomatic dance, she agreed to public baptism. In the elaborate ceremony, she took the Christian name Ana de Sousa, honoring the governor and his wife as her godparents. To the Portuguese, it looked like conversion. To Nzinga, it was a tool. The unexpected succession. Despite her success, the peace with Portugal did not last. The Mbangala continued their raids, and Portuguese soldiers reneged on treaty terms. In 1624, King Mbandi died under mysterious circumstances. Some sources suggest suicide, others whisper of poisoning. What is clear is that Mbandi named his sister as successor before his death. Seizing the ritual objects of kingship and arranging her brother's funeral, Nzinga declared herself Ngola, king. Her claim faced fierce opposition. Traditionalists argued that neither she nor her brother had the right to rule because their mother was not the king's principal wife. Others simply rejected the idea of a female ruler. Nzinga responded by asserting her direct descent from the royal line and by eliminating rivals. She married an Imbangala war chief named Kasa, removed her young nephew, a potential pretender, and secured the sacred relics. It was brutal politics, but in a patriarchal and violent era, the stakes were life and death. The art of war and diplomacy, Nzinga's reign, guerrilla tactics and disguise. Once enthroned, Nzinga found herself at war on multiple fronts. Portuguese forces supported rival claimants and attacked her territory. To survive, she innovated. Contemporary accounts note that she adopted male dress and the title Ngola, both to assert authority and to lead her troops without the prejudice that greeted women warriors. One study of her life points out that she led troops into battle, dressed as a man, took the title of Angola, or king, and kept male concubines. Whether this description reflects cultural practice or European fascination, it suggests that she manipulated gender norms to her advantage. By presenting herself as a king rather than a queen, she circumvented arguments that a woman could not rule. Nzinga's military strategy combined conventional warfare with guerrilla tactics. The UNESCO biography notes that she mastered the art of guerrilla fighting and espionage. She sent spies to Luanda to monitor Portuguese reinforcements and study European combat techniques. Her troops attacked at night to surprise the enemy. Over 30 years of war, she avoided capture despite multiple plots. She also knew when to cut her losses. When forced to retreat from the islands in the Kwanza River, she abandoned followers who would slow her down, calculating that the Portuguese were more interested in recapturing slaves than chasing her. That ruthless practicality kept her alive. Shifting alliances and strategic marriages. Nzinga's diplomacy was as fluid as her warfare. She played European powers against one another. When the Portuguese refused her terms, she formed an alliance with the Dutch, who briefly occupied Luanda in the 1640s. This partnership allowed her to recapture territories and threaten Portuguese forts. She also negotiated with neighboring African states like Congo, Kasanje, and Kisama, weaving a web of alliances. In some cases, she married warlords or nobles to secure loyalty or neutralize threats. These marriages were strategic, not romantic. She reportedly married several men and kept them as concubines when they were no longer politically useful. European observers were scandalized. Nzinga simply used every tool at her disposal. Her negotiations often involved religion. Having been baptized once, she adopted Christianity when it suited her and abandoned it when it didn't. The UNESCO dossier notes that she had an acute understanding of religious and commercial dynamics and promised conversion of her people as a bargaining chip with the Portuguese. She reconverted to Christianity toward the end of her life, perhaps to secure peace. Her flexible faith confounded missionaries, but served her political aims. Defiance and resilience. The war took its toll. At various times, Portuguese invasions forced Nzinga to flee Ndongo entirely. She re-established her capital in Matamba, a neighboring kingdom she conquered and ruled for decades. Even while in exile, she signed letters as Ngola Nzinga Mbande, Queen of Ndongo and Matamba. From her new base, she welcomed runaway slaves and refugees, swelling her ranks and undercutting the Portuguese economy. She authorized slave trading between Matamba and Luanda, in order to fund her army and keep trade routes open. This pragmatic participation in the slave trade may feel uncomfortable to modern listeners, but it reflects the brutal calculations of the time. By controlling the trade herself, she kept resources within her kingdom and prevented complete domination by Portugal. One of her most impressive feats was surviving decades of warfare. She signed a final peace treaty with the Portuguese in the 1650s, after which she focused on rebuilding. She resettled former slaves, reorganized her state, and continued to call herself king. Even in her 80s, she remained politically active. She died on 17th of December 1663 at the age of about 80, having resisted colonial domination for almost 40 years. Few European monarchs of the era reigned so long, or with such tenacity. Beyond the battlefield, a visionary leader. Social and economic reforms. Nzinga's legacy is not just about war. She understood that a strong society needed economic foundations. By allowing the slave trade between Matamba and Portuguese settlements, she facilitated the exchange of livestock, fish, textiles, palm oil, and other goods. These exchanges supported the growth of quitandas, popular markets where women played key roles. In effect, she harnessed commerce to stabilize her kingdom and empower female traders. She also took in diverse populations, including Mbangala warriors and people from neighboring regions, integrating them into a cohesive society. Her willingness to incorporate different ethnic groups and beliefs created a multicultural state that was more resilient than the fragmented chiefdoms around her. Education and cultural integration. The UNESCO dossier describes Nzinga as a learned and cultured woman. In addition to her native Kimbundu, she spoke Portuguese and wrote letters to King João IV and King Afonso VI of Portugal. Literacy gave her a direct channel to European courts, bypassing colonial governors. Her understanding of both African and European cultures allowed her to navigate complex diplomatic terrain. She used spies not only to gather intelligence, but also to study Portuguese military drills and plan counter-tactics. Her embrace of knowledge extended to religion. She moved between Christianity and indigenous beliefs as circumstances required, keeping her people united while placating foreign powers. She also used ritual to legitimize her rule, preserving her brother's remains in a reliquary for consultation. A legacy of empowerment, Nzinga's actions inspired generations. The UNESCO report notes that she became an icon for the popular movement for the liberation of Angola during the 20th century struggle for independence. Women fighting against Portuguese colonial rule invoked her name for strength. Today, Angolan women serve in the army, police, government and business sectors at strikingly high rates. In Luanda, a statue of Nzinga Mbande stands in Kinaxixi Square, a testament to her enduring presence. Her story challenges stereotypes about African societies being uniformly patriarchal. She proved that women could wield power, command armies, and negotiate with foreign empires. Her willingness to adapt and to place her people's survival above personal pride offers lessons for leaders everywhere. Her echo through time. Why Nzinga still matters. History is not just a catalogue of events. It is a reservoir of examples. Nzinga Mbande's life forces us to grapple with uncomfortable truths about colonization, resistance, and complicity. She fought against the Portuguese, yet engaged in the slave trade. She promoted cultural unity, yet used brutal tactics to secure her throne. She embraced Christianity when it advanced her aims, yet returned to indigenous practices when it did not. These contradictions make her human, and that humanity is precisely what makes her story so instructive. For modern leaders, her adaptability is a masterclass. She understood the value of learning the language and customs of her adversaries. She showed that diplomacy and warfare are not mutually exclusive but complementary tools. Her use of espionage and night attacks reminds us that innovation often comes from the margins. Above all, she kept the survival and autonomy of her people at the forefront of every decision, even when it meant making morally ambiguous choices. From a broader cultural perspective, reclaiming Nzinga's story helps to rebalance historical narratives. Too often, African history is told through the lens of European explorers and colonizers. By centering an African voice, especially a female one, we gain a richer, more accurate picture of the past. Nzinga's tale invites us to seek out the countless other leaders whose names have been effaced by colonial histories. Her life encourages us to question simple hero-villain dichotomies and to appreciate the complexity of historical actors. A call to action pause. As you finish this story, resist the temptation to let it fade. Talk about Nzinga with friends and family. If you are a teacher, bring her into your classroom. If you are a student, use her as a lens to examine other hidden histories. Watch the ways in which she navigated faith, gender, and power, and reflect on what those lessons mean in our own time. Africa's first female ruler of the early modern period did more than resist colonizers. She crafted a blueprint for resilience. Her strategies, compromises, and unwavering spirit echo through time, reminding us that leadership is not about titles, but about vision. Let's celebrate Nzinga Mbande, the woman who twisted fate itself to her will and left an indelible mark on a continent and its people.